Like, can you imagine if there's a call coming in from outer space and there's aliens on the other line, they want to speak to somebody from Earth? Who gets to answer? Who gets to talk to them? It's such a huge question.
Yeah.
It's and I don't know the answer to it, but it's definitely a wild one to think about.
I'm not feeling great about our chances across the board. I don't know. People who have our best
Put
interests.
Hank Green on the line.
That's not a bad idea. That's not a terrible idea. Welcome, friends, to episode 307 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss the first 4 episodes of David Benioff, D.B. Weiss, and Alexander Wu's 2024 series, Three Body Problem. We just, hours ago, just had an eclipse. In some places, a total eclipse, but not, unfortunately, just a partial here. I think it was like 60%. But talking about the Three Body Problem, an eclipse is happening, big celestial bodies at work here. This is feeling very timely, or maybe there's other parties at play here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Syzygy is the word of the day. I think I learned about this word. Maybe I'd heard it before. I don't know. And it's about bodies lining up, much like in the case of a lunar or solar eclipse. Unfortunately for me here today in Oregon, it is pure overcast skies. Couldn't see a thing. But we always talk about how, back in 2017 is when we launched the podcast, right around the time of an eclipse.
Think about it every time there's an eclipse. And also recently on my engagement trip where we were out in California, we were in Joshua Tree for one of the most recent eclipses as well. So just like eclipses are starting to have like a lot of weight in my life. So this is, again, this one can't be for nothing. Let's make sure this is a good episode. I can't see anything in this, by the way, so I have to take these off. This is like, you know how this is.
I'm amazed you're able to wear them this long.
It's like 1,000 times stronger than sunglasses. So, pretty extreme. I don't know that they're actually, but it feels like that.
Yeah, man. I mean, it just feels like it's time, right, to cover this. And what an interesting adaptation this has been so far. We've only watched the first 4 episodes. So that's all we're going to be talking about today. And we've only read the first 2 parts of a 3-part book. So we don't know how this all ends. Plus, it's a trilogy, so we definitely don't know anything about future books. So, if you're still fairly new to the show or new to the book, you're safe with us as far as spoilers go. Want to know, man, how are you feeling about the Double Ds, which we call them from their days back in the Game of Thrones showrunners? Which, by the way, season 8, 5 years ago, I was looking.
Yeah, pretty crazy. For a show that was such a big part of like the zeitgeist in everyone's lives, and like still a property that I care a lot for, and you do as well. We've talked about it many times. George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire.
We covered season 1.
So we're, in talking about David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, like we have an interesting history with them because I think there was a period of time where they could do no wrong in my eyes. Those early seasons of Game of Thrones, I was just blown away. And that was around the time period that they had all the material and they had a lot of time to work on these seasons and expectations weren't extremely high. And then I think we talk in that episode, we've reacted to season 8 on a bonus episode.
I think it's a Patreon episode now. It's not yet out on the main feed, but maybe it's time. Sometime
soon that will see the light of day, I'm sure. That's a nice bit of syzygy for us, like things lining up. If you wanted to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/ink2film, we would really appreciate your support over there. And you get to hear those episodes well before they appear in the main feed.
We kind of unload on that one. Usually those episodes are like half hour long, and I think that one's like 2 hours because we had a lot of thoughts about that season. We can't rehash them here. Obviously 2 hours versus like, we got to talk about Three Body Problem here. But I'd feel remiss if we didn't at least acknowledge who is the showrunner of this, right? And our sort of history with them. And I agree. I was a big fan early on. I thought the early seasons of Game of Thrones were great. And you have to still kind of give them credit for that, even as I look at the last season and really the last few seasons, because I think you can see the sort of the writing on the wall as we were leading to season 8. But really that final season is one of the biggest just fumbles in like TV history of just such like positive fan engagement. People were so excited. It was a beloved series, and just to largely fumble and just lose all of that goodwill and become, for a while, it seemed like no one wanted to touch them. It's wild to see that happen. And I definitely am among those who hated the final season. I know there are people who out there who defend it. I think most book readers are people who did not like the final one, but it's not just the book readers. I think plenty of show watchers also didn't like it.
I think that there's many people who notice the flaws at this point, but it's also like they had a really difficult task. Like, no question about it. George R.R. Martin has taken a long time to finish the story as well, because tying up all these amazing threads is like in a satisfying way is difficult. But it did feel like at the end there, they were kind of, giving the middle finger to the fans and saying like, we're out of here. We're on to bigger and better things. Cause they were, there were other, like, I guess George R.R. Martin and HBO wanted more seasons and they didn't. And we can't rehash everything here, but they left us in a bad spot. There's a
lot that went down with that.
Yeah, they left us in a bad spot coming into Three Body Problem. And honestly, I was kind of like, I'm not interested in whatever they're working on. That's how much I feel like they burned us. And as kind of buzz built for the story, I heard from you and some other people about like this story, the actual book having a lot of substance to it and being like thought-provoking. And it just turned out that we wanted to cover this and we wanted to give them another chance here. And
whether or not they deserve it, I think it's going to be up to you to decide, listener. But yeah, I mean, it's like, it's a project I'm excited about. I was interested in, and ultimately I look back at when they were at their best, and it's when they were adapting other people's work, right? Like they're really good at that. It was when they were forging into new territory and having to make up plot lines of their own for a story that they didn't originate, where that got them into trouble. So I don't know. I went in definitely like with some reservations into the show, but I think with an open enough mind, because I have to acknowledge that some of those early seasons of Game of Thrones are like some of my favorite in all of television still, and these are the guys who are ultimately behind it. Yeah. Right. And you can't take that away from them, even if you want to. Like, that's still part of what they've done.
Alexander Wu has been brought on as also a writer, producer, and showrunner. So it's not just them. So they have another person to bounce ideas off of. And
I saw that name and I was curious. I hope you found out a little bit about them, because I want to know more.
I mean, we can dig into it now some. Alexander Wu studied creative writing at Princeton. He attended Yale School of Drama, earned his MFA in playwriting there. He first worked for True Blood with HBO as a writer. In an interview, he described the True Blood writing room. Every writer's room is different. True Blood has a relatively small writing team, so the chemistry between the writers is crucial to the style and tone of the show. It's kind of like being on a jury where you are sequestered together for long hours and many days, and you figure things out together. Our team is a wonderful group of people, and even though the hours are long, we all work really well and the hours just fly by. So I wanted to mention that just because like the idea of collaborating on these kinds of stories and what that could mean for Three Body Problem is obvious to me there, from that being his background. He's also worked on, he's written episodes for Manhattan, Sleeper Cell, LAX, and Wonder Falls, and he co-wrote HBO's adaptation of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Oh, wow. So American, sounds like?
Yes, he's American.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because one of the things, I mean, if you read the book and you watch this show, you'll immediately notice much of it has been moved to London. There's still definitely a lot that's set in China and dealing with China, but it has kind of just a more international feel to me. Although admittedly most of it's set in London, at least the modern day stuff. So yeah, that's a big change, and one that I don't know. I mean, like, that can be a thing that completely turns you off the show. Yeah. To where you won't even give it a shot. Because, like, it does feel like whitewashing, right? Like, taking this story completely set in another culture and bringing it over to the West and putting it in London. That's inherently, a thing that has been done a lot in the past. It has a history. And it's frustrating. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of attempt to still represent a lot of the original sort of content of the story, while also, it's adaptation. So it's always going to change when someone else takes it on. And here the Double Ds are a couple of white guys. So it was always going to be different. And I think it kind of had to be if they were going to do it, because it would be inauthentic for them to try and keep it all in China anyway. Because, like, why would they be the showrunners at that point? Like, that wouldn't make sense to me. So I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about it. Ultimately, like, I'm still able to enjoy the show. And I think I can notice there are some efforts. Whether or not it's enough, I don't know.
The story that we talked about last week, we check out that episode if you haven't. There's a lot of context that you'll be getting for this episode.
Yeah.
It was so inherently Chinese, right? Like everything
Right.
about it was seated in the fact that it was Chinese. And you and I even spoke about like there are some cultural things that we may not be picking up all the way on. And in that way, it felt fresh and it felt like something that was like wholly like a unique voice that I hadn't experienced before. And in that way, kind of turning the show now into more of an international show can be seen as like an international show, or can be seen as like westernizing what was a Chinese story. And so I'm on the fence about it as well. I have some things that
I mean, it's
felt
English
like
language. Yeah, some of this was going to happen.
I'm still going to wait and see kind of where it all lands, but I did feel that there were some of like the textural things that was in the book that maybe might appear in the show, but didn't really feel like it had the same weight and significance. I mean, just to start out, it's not a spoiler to talk about the very first scene, such a shocking scene. And it's depicting the Cultural Revolution, which we talked a little bit about last week. And
specifically a struggle session with, was it Ye Wenjie's father? And he's being beaten, and he ends up being beaten to death. And like this is the start of the book too. And it's a brutal start to the book. It's really depicted quite horrifically here. And yeah, I mean, it sets the tone for the show. I think it's safe to say that they want this to feel similar to how Game of Thrones felt, in the sense of like, we're going to get pretty shocking. There's definitely
brutal
nudity in the show. There's going to be brutality at times. But I would say overall, it hasn't been as dark. At least so far, to me,
I don't think so,
as Game of Thrones often was.
And I mean, just to talk generally, I did think that there was a sense of existential dread that I felt really heavy in the book. And maybe it's because we haven't gotten to certain parts in the show yet. It felt a little less overbearing. It felt like the characters kind of were going through some of the struggles and some of the stuff that you would expect based on their situations, but something about it felt lighter, and like it wasn't really, I don't know, pinpointing in on like the trauma, or in just like in general, like the shock and like insignificance that some of these characters may feel. And again, I'll withhold judgment, I guess, until the very end. But yeah, just in terms of it not being quite as dark as I was expecting, especially with what we've seen from the Double D's in the past.
Interesting. I got a similar vibe in that regard, but I can see why you might say that. I do think we're getting, at least so far, we've got a lot more answers in the show. I don't know if they're all the same answers that we're going to get in the book, but I'm not as confused.
Oh yeah, that's very much the case. Yeah,
they have held my hand a little bit more and like explained stuff to me and like made it digestible in a way that the book wasn't.
Yeah, is that a pro or a con for you though?
I think it's ultimately a pro, because I don't think it's overdone. Maybe some would disagree. It honestly is one of those things that like it's going to be divisive, right? Like, you're going to lose some like diehards who really want it to be this like really opaque thing that's really hard to understand. But like, you're going to get so many more viewers who are able to engage with the show that otherwise would be sort of excluded. I think that it still feels weird. It still feels like it's dealing with topics that we're only scratching the surface of, even if we are getting some more answers than we had in the book. But having more answers, it puts me a little bit more at ease, just in like I can orient myself in the story a little bit and like figure out what is going on, I think, in a way that the book, I was like, I still don't really know what's going on at this point in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. And there's so many like scientific concepts that are kind of introduced to you that I think it's stripped back here. Like the major ones exist, I think still they're kind of engaging with them, but the book is opening up cans of worms that I am, as you said, just scratching the surface of. Like, I'm like, okay, I can kind of vaguely understand the gist of what we're talking about here. Yeah. And the show doesn't do a lot of that. The show has like a few, futuristic sci-fi elements, but they dole it out to you at a pace that you can grab on as well. And maybe there's something
Some of the
there.
Stuff is like name checked, right? Like they'll mention it, but like we don't spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's there. Like if you know what they're talking about, you can kind of get into it. But they don't spend a lot of time describing it. In fact, often it's kind of presented as almost technobabble, except for it's technobabble that like it's real. It's not technobabble. They're actually referencing real things. But it's presented in such a way that like the character who's hearing it doesn't understand it, and it's like, oh, you eggheads, Like there's a couple times where that happens.
Yeah, they're almost like used as Easter eggs rather than like becoming relevant to the plot, really.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's
But
something
I think
going
they
on.
are relevant. We just don't maybe realize it as viewers, like how relevant it is.
Sure, that could be the case as well, yeah. So in my research, I found some of how this came about because you were asking like, after Game of Thrones, what were D&D doing? I know that they were kind of signed on with Disney to do some Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
That ended up falling through. But ultimately, it was announced in September of 2020 that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss were developing a TV adaptation of the novel at Netflix, with Alexander Wu co-writing alongside them.
I remember that announcement. Everyone was pretty mad
Yes.
because it was still right on the heels of everybody being like, how are they still getting work?
Yep. Yeah, and I think they signed like a pretty massive deal with Netflix too.
Yeah.
It wasn't just for like this series. It was like a kind of overall deal that they're going to get to do a bunch of stuff in the Netflix with Netflix's money basically. So yeah, I can understand people being like, what the hell, they just burned us. So on the Chinese side, I was looking into like, how they optioned it, how the things came about, and I found this wild story I was not familiar with.
Okay.
On Christmas Day 2020, Lin Qi, founder of Yuzu Games and an executive producer on Three Body Problem, died after ingesting a poison beverage, with 4 others becoming ill. An executive at Yuzu Games, Zhu Yao, was sentenced to death for murder in March 2024, the day after the series premiered on Netflix. Lin had purchased the rights to the book franchise and hired Zhu Yao, a lawyer, in 2017 to manage the rights to Liu's novels. The poisonings were an attempt by Yao to take control of the subsidiary company that owned the rights to the series.
Wow.
That just
That's some
happened.
dark shit. Wow.
So crazy.
Unbelievable, man. So I know there's also this Chinese show that came out, I think, not long ago.
I think it was last year.
Which one are they connected with?
So from what I could tell, it's from more so the Netflix side. This is a tragic story because ultimately, like, this person poisoned food or something like that and killed this producer, and then ultimately was then sentenced to death himself very recently. So
Wow.
this is all swirling around the release, and I don't know if it's like kind of hit the Western news market quite as much, but I've looked
First
at a
I've heard of
CBS
it, so.
article. Yeah. Possibly some other developments coming out. Maybe we don't have all the facts, but
Yeah,
as
it
far as
seems
I can
like
tell,
it's
someone,
developing story. Sounds like.
someone is dead and someone apparently has been accused of poisoning them. According to the New York Times, there's a quote here. His motive was a dispute over running the business, according to the court's decision, while other sources assign it to Zhu Yao getting a pay cut and being demoted on account of poor work performance. So yeah, there's some sketchy stuff going on, and we talked last week about how like there were U.S. Republican senators who were like asking Netflix for statements about like why they were adapting this, and just the fact that it was already connected to China and a Chinese author in general, there was a lot going on with it. And then you add on this other layer of all this other stuff happening.
Yeah.
Sounds like in the back end of like producers and things like that. Like it's getting kind of crazy.
Not to mention, there's also this Chinese series that comes out in 2023. I think there's like 30 episodes of the thing. I don't know. I from what I hear, that one's like more quote unquote faithful.
We haven't seen the entire show, but I have seen some response from China and just like our audience here as well, like the Western audience, talking about it. So I'll give some of what I found here on Netflix. Three Body Problem received a mixed response in China. While Netflix is not available there, viewers are using VPNs to circumvent geo-restrictions or view pirated versions.
Wow. Okay.
According to The Guardian, the Three Body Problem hashtag had been read 2.3 billion times and discussed 1.424 million times on the Chinese social media platform Weibo. Chinese viewers criticized changing the races, as we've talked about a little bit here. There were also some who didn't like switching the gender of some of the protagonists, and some were saying there was cultural appropriation here and some dumbing down of the concepts to appeal to non-Chinese audiences, and compared it unfavorably to the 2023 Chinese television adaptation.
Yeah, I'm actually curious about that one. I might have to give it a try. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, in some sense, like there's nothing that unique about that kind of response, right? Like we see this happen all the times with fan bases, and whenever there are gender swaps and different kinds of things brought in, like there's always going to be a portion of book readers who get really upset about that stuff.
Well,
I think
and some people
historically for us, we don't care as much about that. The process of adaptation is always about change anyway. To some extent, I'm usually okay with that. But there always can be arguments against it, I suppose.
Well, it's like as long as they're still true to the character of the novel in some sense, like they some of the times they aren't, and it still works out, and the character is still wholly its own. If you want to connect with the people who read the book, you have to somewhat stay in the same realm of what was being accomplished by having that character in the story.
I think specifically here, Wang has been changed dramatically, and I would say split into multiple characters.
Definitely, yeah.
Not just a changing of the gender, because I think there are multiple characters who are filling this role in different ways. So it's like you took a person, you turned them into a group. So that's always going to be kind of different.
I also saw praise for the Netflix series and its depiction of the Cultural Revolution from some. Fidelity to the source material, wider appeal to a global audience. That's other praise that was on that Weibo site. There was a Chinese film review website, Mitsumi, which praised the Netflix adaptation as, quote, not only a new interpretation of Liu Cixin's original work, but also an important contribution to global science fiction literature. China Military Online, a state media outlet controlled by the People's Liberation Army, criticized the series because it kept Chinese as antagonists while doing away with the book's portrayal of modern-day China.
That's fair, even though consider the source.
Considering the source, yeah.
But I mean, it's somewhat true. You know, it's like it's tangly, right? All we could do is talk about the art in front of us. So I think that's what we got to move on to. I think a lot of this is going to be, have to be decided in the hearts and minds of those listening and those viewing the show.
Yeah. Well, first I want to talk about cast, right? Like getting into this, we've talked a little bit about some of the changes to the characters, but we have Isa Gonzalez as Dr. Agustina Augie Salazar, which is
one of the Wong characters.
I would say
maybe the main one.
The main one, yeah.
Yeah.
We're also getting Jess Hong as Jin Chang, who is kind of the version that's interacting with the game quite a bit.
Yeah,
and
I guess this character does exist in the book, but was not as prominent. And is doing more of the game stuff here, so kind of taking on more of that role.
Some of the things that she was doing or he was doing in the original story. And then we have some familiar faces for Game of Thrones fans. We have
absolutely you get to play this fun little game of like who's from Game of Thrones as you're watching, and you will recognize some faces for sure.
Yeah, John Bradley as Jack Bruni. He's playing.
And I was happy to see him. Old Samuel Tarly.
Yeah.
Classic, one of my favorite characters from the series. He was really good in the show. I was happy to see him and playing against type here a bit. Like this is a very different version.
Yeah, he's not playing kind of reserved Samwell. He's definitely like kind of a over the top, kind of a dirtbag. I don't know.
Yeah, kind of a dirtbag for sure. Yeah.
We also have Liam Cunningham as Thomas Wade.
Yeah, and the Onion Knight himself. Early on, he was just kind of a voice, and I was like, I know that voice. And then we finally got to see him. Definitely excited to see him back. I mean, he's someone I absolutely loved. Such a great character in Game of Thrones. So it's cool to see who they brought back here and see them in new kind of roles. I still don't know much about this character in the show. He's still kind of a mystery. Yeah, I'm starting to get a little bit of him in the final episode, but
seems to be like some kind of arm of the government or some sort of like that secret organization that's totally in the background. Who actually Benedict Wong as Clarence Dashi. He works for Thomas Wade.
And so far for me, he's been kind of a favorite. I really like this version. I like this character in the book too. So I was glad to see that he feels like the same character in a sense, even though they've moved him obviously and changed him some. But I still just really like this. And I like the way he plays off of all these like hyper intelligent scientists like people, he's got his intelligence in his other ways, right? And he's clearly a very clever guy in his own ways, and just kind of gruff and like hard to read, and yet seems to have so much going on sort of behind the eyes to me.
Definitely. We've gotten some flashes of like his home life.
Yeah, episode 4, we'll have to circle back to that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. But yeah, I agree. Benedict Wong's Clarence is one of my standouts currently. He's kind of the person I want to see on screen the most. Yeah. We also got Jonathan Pryce in just a little bit, but he's playing Mike Evans, which I know that the character's name was Mike Evans in the book, but when you hear it said out loud as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, there's no way that you're not going to think of future Hall of Famer Mike Evans. And every time they said it, I kept looking over at my fiance and I was like, Mike Evans, huh? He's like quite the important character here.
I definitely had a little laugh. I'm a Jags fan, not a Bucks fan, but yeah, I definitely know about Mike Evans. And yeah, when they said the first time I think the name is mentioned, they say, what do you know about Mike Evans? And the other character's like, he's rich and he has, he has a lot of money and he doesn't know what to do with it or something. And I was like, hey, probably it is pretty rich. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's not who they're talking about.
Fun little coincidence that I found a lot of joy in. But yeah, Jonathan Pryce plays that character. Also, another notable name, Jovan Adepo, who plays Saul Durand.
Yeah, and this is another kind of facet of the Wong character, right? I would say I like a lot what's going on with him and his relationship with Augie. Kind of a stoner seems to be how he's like dealing with a lot of this, because this first episode we deal a lot with like science being broken and kind of the mental effects that's having on a lot of these scientists. Yeah, he's been good. Part of this crew that includes Alex Sharp is Will Downing. He's probably the last one of this crew who has been another really interesting addition. I don't remember anything like this going on in the book, especially the subplot of him getting diagnosed with cancer and stuff. So he's been interesting. I'm really curious to see what goes on with this character too.
Yeah, we're gonna have to dig into it, but all of these characters also like know each other, whereas in the book they were all scientists from all over the world. It seemed
right. Yeah, they're all like a group of friends here.
From the same program, it sounded, or at least the same university. We also have to talk about Rosalind Chow, who plays Ye Wenjie. She's such an important, and like also young Wenjie, who's Xin Seng. She plays the younger Ye Wenjie in the flashbacks, and then Rosalind Chow in the modern day. Man, that character is so important to the plot, and she is nailing it and carrying all the stuff that she's in.
Absolutely. Both highlights, honestly. And for a minute, I thought they were the same person, de-aged or up-aged. Like, I couldn't tell. I was like, is this the same person? No, two different performers. They just really got the look. Holy cow. And, like, they're both incredible. And both I really hope we continue to get a lot of this like 80s and 60s and stuff like going forward, because I love that version of Ye Wenjie so much. I'm so curious about her and her journey. Really fascinating. And then of course, yeah, like I was so glad to see grandmother aged, I guess, Ye Wenjie still having a prominent role to play here on the 4th episode. But I think we gotta launch into them, man, so we can talk about what actually happens here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump into it. So the first episode is called Countdown. In 1960s China, during the Cultural Revolution, Ye Wenjie witnesses her father's death in a struggle session. At a work camp, she's given a copy of Silent Spring, but is discovered. After refusing to testify against other dissidents, she's transferred to a station with a large radio telescope dish. She figures out the station's purpose as an off-world transmission hub. In present-day UK, a group of former physics students at Oxford who studied under Vera Ye, daughter of Ye Wenjie, discuss how recent experiments have stopped making sense. Vera dies by suicide. Clarence Dashi, a British investigator working for the Strategic Intelligence Agency, while trying to associate multiple scientists' suicides, discovers an advanced gaming headset several of them possessed. Ye Wenjie offers physicist Jin Chang Vera's headset. One of Vera's former students, materials scientist Augustina Augie Salazar, starts seeing a countdown timer in front of her eyes. An unknown woman, later revealed as Tatiana, informs Augie she must abandon all her nanofiber research in order to make the countdown stop. To validate the ultimatum, she asks Augie to watch the sky at midnight the following day. The next day, right at midnight, Augie and Saul, along with the rest of the world, witness the sky flashing a pattern corresponding to her countdown timer, violating all known laws of physics.
Yeah, man. So, this is it's a really interesting pilot here, like kickoff to the show. A lot of interesting questions set up. I still don't know that we have a lot of good answers for them, admittedly. But this countdown stuff, I love the way it was portrayed. It was as creepy as I was sort of hoping it would be from what I imagined in the book. It felt a little different. It seemed like I was unclear in the book, at least. Well, this would be he in the book was seeing the same countdown as everybody else. That's what I assumed. In the show, it is made out to be your countdown.
Yeah,
Tatiana says, and you don't want to see what happens when it reaches 0. It's never good, as if it has reached 0 for other people.
I think that's the implication in the book as well, just because that's like the other scientists committing suicide or dying and all those other things correlating to the timer. But I'm not 100%.
I thought it was just I don't know. I thought it was just like maybe we don't quite understand it, but existential dread causing them to kill themselves, or just the madness of not being able to, get rid of this thing. It's like in your dreams, it's in your vision all the time. And like they horrifically depict it here where, this physicist has cut his eyes out and then written in blood, like I still see it on the wall, like that's like straight up horror movie shit.
Yeah, I don't think that we knew that it was like countdown to the end of their lives timer. I think that
Well, it hasn't been confirmed yet. She's like, you just don't want to see what happens when it gets to 0.
Yeah, it seems like that's like what they're implying in the show. In the
so
book,
I assumed, because as we move through the story, we learn about these aliens potentially coming to Earth, right? Or they're on their way. I thought it was like a countdown to their arrival or something.
So did I. In the book, that's what I thought.
But like, clearly that's not the case in the show. I don't know if that's a change or if that's just we misunderstood that in the book. I don't know. But definitely something kind of different there. But the important thing is I love the way it was portrayed. I thought it was sufficiently creepy. It definitely she seems like completely haunted by it, as you would be. And it's like right in the middle of the vision too, which is like she looks at someone's face and it's just like blocked out by these numbers.
I think this first episode does an excellent job of depicting like what you're talking about, which is like that the dread of the scenario. Yeah. And I expected when the flickering happened in the sky, all characters and just every character in the entire show to react like that and just be like, holy shit, the world is ending. Everything we know is changed and broken. The science is broken thing. And instead they kind of like, no one really deals with that other than, I was, and I kind of like thought like going forward, a lot of those things that would be like earth shattering and would just totally change your perspective weren't dealt with by the characters in the show.
I kind of agree because like, I was like, oh wow, did everybody see this when the stars flickered? And I was like, if so, this is going to be fucking huge. And then like we get into the next episode, we'll get there. But like, there's people just talking about like, hey, what do you think that was? That was weird, huh? What do you think the answer for that is? And like, on one hand, I can kind of see that playing out that way for some, right? I do think there would be a percentage of people who are just like, that's weird. Oh, well, got to, move on with my day to day. Because we've seen that happen, with lots of other big events in the world. But I think there would be a significant number of people who lost their fucking minds over that.
Not to mention the person who asks Augie, like, hey, what did you think of that? Is like some kind of nanotech scientist. Like those are the people who are going to be like, what the fuck is happening? We have to, like, everyone would be running around like a chicken with his head cut off.
I agree that at least a portion of people would be. Is there a portion of people who would seem to not care that much? Maybe. But it does feel a little bit underserved. It's kind of like they went for the cool moment. They decided they wanted it to be something everybody saw, but they did these little like news broadcasts about it.
And people were like, kind of like, oh, was that AI generated or whatever? Like trying to gaslight and say like,
well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. That's Saul's sort of theory is that it's some sort of deep fake. I think he says, which I'm not sure if that's how you use that term, but essentially implying that it was some sort of illusion. And I agree that is probably what's happening. And so I think he's maybe onto something there. Pretty wild stuff, though. Other stuff from this first episode is the game helmet is discovered. And I wanted to mention that because first off, I was giving some shit to Liu because I was like, this doesn't feel like it's going to, be as transportative as it's described and all this stuff. But like, admittedly, he started writing that book in 2006.
Right.
Like that technology was still so early, so he was imagining it as being very cutting edge. But I do like what they've done here, which has gone the way I've talked about. Like this is some sort of brain interface
neural
to where
something.
It completely fools your senses into thinking you're there. You can taste things, you can reach down, touch, you can see your own hand, like you can see your whole body. Like that's just a whole different level of virtual reality that we are not able to do yet. And they mentioned that in the show. They're like, this isn't next gen. This is 100, 150 years down the road kind of stuff.
Yeah, which bums me out because I don't know that I'll be here 100 years to
I know, right? Like I would love to.
Can we say that that's maybe like, 20, 30 years in the future?
I also love that they're touching on the whole like privacy aspect of like actual tech today of like, yeah, you're getting to experience this game, but they're also analyzing our brains and what are they doing with that information? I love that was brought up because it's totally true. It's
like chemical, like biological responses to certain like stimuli. Like, yeah, that's pretty invasive information.
Yeah, they're doing these brain scans of you and they're going to have all of your like brain mapped out by the time you're done with it.
We talked some about the Ye Wenjie stuff, but I did want to touch back in. Like that first scene was an incredible opening. It's haunting. It's sufficiently terrifying.
Well, starts her arc off, which I was unclear on like what that was going to be, right? But like clearly this is someone who becomes disillusioned in humanity.
Yeah.
As we've sort of learned now that this is where this is going, and you could totally see why. Tracking her sort of, I don't know, her path. I'll be curious to see if the book version is the same ultimately, or if this is a slight change. For show Wenjie.
And a lot of things that are straight from the book. She kind of very quickly gets into this organization. They move her up the ranks based on her skills and her knowledge. And it's hard, I think, for an audience right away to kind of know what the connection is. But then they have this reveal of like, oh, she is actually the mother of Ye Vera, who in the book, that's not like a reveal, but in the show, they went out of their way to do like a reveal on a picture frame, and that ties it all together. And that's kind of, I think that's how the first episode kind of ends, or maybe the second episode. And it was just interesting that like they had to do this kind of reveal as like an exclamation point at the end of an episode to like end the episode and keep people invested and continuing on to Netflix. Whereas in the book, it was just like, that's information that we had from the start.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of making a show compelling though, right? And like, again, like drawing it together for audiences in case anyone didn't. Because like I knew, of course, like as soon as you see her and you hear the name, but like not everybody's going to make that connection. So yeah, I think it's understandable. The other thing I wanted to point out from this episode is we get the first hints about this line. So there's this book that they're reading. God, what's the name of it? It's like New Spring or something? Silent Spring, yeah. And there's this quote from it that keeps coming back up, and it's, "In nature, nothing exists alone." And when I first heard that, I was like, what does this have to do with anything? But then like I kind of put it together, and I was like, okay, this is about humanity and aliens, right? If the universe is nature, if humans exist, and nothing in nature of nothing exists alone, that means that there are aliens. It's like kind of what I'm interpreting this to be. And I like the way they kind of deal with this alien stuff, because it's like a slow drip. Because I think they realize that if you lead off with too much of this, it's going to change the tone. It's all of a sudden going to feel just so far in the world of sci-fi that a lot of people are going to like roll their eyes and check out. Instead, we get this really slow drip reveal of it, and it's sufficiently built up to where it feels like it has the weight that it would have, in the real world. So I like the way that this is handled, and and how we're just getting tastes of it here early.
That line that you mentioned, "In nature, nothing exists alone," is also interesting to think about in terms of like the characters, because last week you talked about how the book felt a little more removed from the characters and a little more macro in terms of like the goings on of the science and the aliens in the game and everything. And I think that the show does do what we expected, which is drill down into like more character driven storylines. Yeah. And I think it's a commentary on aliens and humans, but also just like humans yearning for that connection. And then also like you look at Ye Wenjie, she seems like a lone wolf in these flashbacks, but like in nature nothing exists alone. And you start to see her relationship with this other character, Mike Evans, and maybe like how that will develop over the arc of the entire show, at least.
Well, also her connection to humanity. Yeah, I think you're right. Like it's like she's not just a single person. Her actions are having these huge consequences for humanity. I think it's clear to see already. Right. And so it's also like recognizing her connection to her own ecosystem.
I hope that she does, because as far as we've seen so far, she seems like she is anti-humanity. So, but we'll see how that develops. So episode 2 is called Red Coast. In 1960s and 70s China, Ye Wenjie, still working at the SETA site, realizes the sun can amplify their signals, but the proposal is struck down due to symbolism. She implements it regardless, broadcasting a message to the universe. She meets Mike Evans, a radical environmentalist, and later confronts her father's killer. She gets a reply to her message from a pacifist rogue agent in a hostile alien civilization, warning her not to contact them again, as it will prompt an invasion. Disillusioned with human society, she replies anyway, promising to help whatever civilization sending the signal to do so. In the present day, Augie's countdown continues. After a successful demonstration of her nanofiber technology, she frantically orders the project shuttered, after which her countdown stops. Using the gaming headset, Jin Chang advances through the three-body video game and shows Jack, another former student and now entrepreneur, but the interface swiftly rejects him. Later, a similar headset is delivered to his home along with an invitation to play the game. Will Downing, a friend and former physicist at Vera's lab, confides in Jack that he is dying of pancreatic cancer.
So this one brings up something we're going to see a lot for Wenjie here, and that's her being betrayed by men in her life. Time and again, some man comes in, seems like a confidant, seems like he's got her back, and then will either try and take credit for her or turn on her or betray her in some way. And once again, we see that here with this guy who has been backing her up, but then when it comes time for the idea, he seems to be trying to kind of steal her credit, but then it doesn't even go through anyway. So it was interesting because like I was wondering if like was he doing it because he thought that would be the only way they'd find it palatable, but then it failed? But if so, like, you should clue her in on that's what you're doing, not just do it on go rogue and do it on your own. I don't know. It was a weird choice, but then it didn't work anyway. So like, fuck that guy, I guess.
It felt more so like he wanted the credit to me.
That's what it seemed like to me. Yeah, like he wanted it to be like, I'm the one who came up with this idea. I'm the one who came up with this math, and then it just didn't work.
And interesting to see the symbolism of like the sun being Mao and how they weren't able, they didn't want, they saw
That
it
wasn't in the
projecting
book
the signal
that I remember, at least.
I don't remember that either. Yeah, but
Yeah.
projecting the signal at the sun would in some way sully some sort of representation of Mao. Very interesting. I guess in the idea of like scientific advancements and trying to do things like that, it's that overbearing nature of like a government body, and that's just kind of what they're trying to represent here. It worked pretty well. I kind of was like, what, I want to see this experiment work, and then like as it progressed and we got closer, I was like, maybe I definitely don't want to see this experiment progress.
Yeah, it was cool to see because like we've seen what's going on in the modern day, so we kind of know like, maybe this isn't the best thing. But like you're cheering for her, right? And we want her to get the recognition and get this thing to work. But it gets into the whole idea of the Fermi Paradox, and why, like basically the Fermi Paradox, to put it simply, is just like if aliens are so plentiful in the universe, where are they? Why haven't we encountered them? Why haven't we seen any evidence of them yet? And there are a lot of proposed, solutions to this so-called paradox, reasons why. And one of them is the dark forest hypothesis, which I know that the next book is called The Dark Forest. So I think that there's an interesting connection there. Do you know much about this sort of hypothesis?
No, I don't think so. But I was going to mention like one of the solutions being that they don't want to be found. Is that along all the same lines?
So similar. So the dark forest hypothesis is that the universe itself is a hostile and dangerous place for civilizations, and because of that, it is in the best interest of civilizations to remain silent and to remain hidden, because if they make themselves known, they will attract predators. And so that's the idea we're dealing with a little bit here, I think, and it's interesting the next book is named that. So in that sense, that's the sort of hypothesis where people are like, maybe we shouldn't be broadcasting where we are into the universe. Maybe we shouldn't be trying to make a bunch of noise, which is, like humanity has been trying to some extent, but, it is also debatable how effectively, because, radio waves and things like that dissipate quite quickly. The idea that they would even be intelligible once you get even to the next star system is, pretty debatable. And then also like sending out something like satellites that we've sent out, like they really haven't gone that far in the scope of
takes a long time.
The cosmos. It takes a long fucking time to get.
I was
anywhere.
reading something today about like the closest star to us. There's a possibility
other than the sun.
Other than the sun, yeah. There's a possibility
Alpha
that
Centauri.
Alpha Centauri. There's a possibility that there are other Goldilocks sort of planets out there, and I think specifically there's one close to there, and it would take something like 20 years to send anything over there that could transmit back to us. By the time it gets over there, it would also take 4 years for it to transmit back.
Yeah,
so it's like
4 light years away, which is discussed a little bit in this show. That's the nearest. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's where these trisolar beings are supposed to be coming from. Okay. Honestly, is Alpha Centauri. I think that was said at one point.
Trisolarians that are gonna possibly roll themselves up like little fucking fruit roll-ups and send themselves over here.
I guess. Now, like, I'm still unclear on whether or not. I mean, and here we get into the game some in this episode, right? The game stuff is really weird in the book. I mentioned that it was probably my least favorite parts. Visually in the show, it's been pretty cool to see. It's been fun to imagine. I do like that, in my opinion, percentage-wise, the percentage of the story that has taken place inside the game versus outside the game, they have shrunk the game portion some. Yeah. And I like that, because it's like you get all the like cool visuals and the fun elements without spending as significant portions of time in the game like we do in the book, which ultimately I found slightly less interesting, especially the more time we spent there, and I wanted to know what was going on in our like, modern storyline, which I was really attached to. So I thought it's been handled pretty well. At times, some of the CGI looked a little janky. I think in a future episode we have some really janky looking horses.
Oh, agreed.
And couple of moments like that where I was like, I don't know why this looks so bad right now. This seems like, for a 2024 show, this should not look like this. But
I was thinking about it too. You mentioned like, oh, like they made the decision to spend less time in the game. Maybe that was budgetary. You know what I mean? Maybe that was also like they wanted to spend the money where they could, because it costs a lot less to film somebody in a room than it does to film an entire army or whatever.
It's pretty cool though, because it's like it's still a mystery a bit, but like I think we're getting the sense as we progress through the show that the game is using alien tech, but is sort of designed and run by humans to an extent.
Seems that way.
Maybe like in concert with the aliens, the Yati.
They're at least monitoring that game. Yeah, it seems. Yeah,
unclear, but it's some sort of recruitment tool for sure. They're trying to recruit scientists who like can help study this and sort of learn that the people, like saving the people, are what's important. And then we eventually do get in a future episode the reveal that a bunch of these Trisolarians left. And that's the implication, is that they're coming to Earth. So it does still seem to be like somewhat a history, but again, they've been changed to look like humans. It's very weird. And this whole like rolling up and looking like leather, I'm like wondering, like, is this something that they actually do, or is this like a metaphor for something they do? I don't know.
Could be. I don't think we have the information yet.
Although they don't seem to understand metaphors if we get to episode 4. So.
That is really weird. I do like that he's communicating with them like that and kind of doling secrets without realizing it, and it gets very religious as well very quickly. But we'll get to that.
So I also wanted to talk about this pacifist, which is a really interesting character, right? Because otherwise we've seen this group of aliens as kind of like a monolith. They seem to be speaking as like a group. And yet there was apparently this one pacifist among their society who warned, don't contact us, like don't respond to this, cut off all communications. And Ye Wenjie goes against that and reaches out anyway. But that's ominous, and seems to imply that them coming to Earth is not going to be a good thing, even though that's, I guess, debatable. Like, what does that even look like? And I don't even know if they know exactly. They want to prepare humanity for their arrival, and that seems to be like what a lot of what's going on here, like a lot of this like laying the groundwork for their arrival, but what their actual intentions are when they get here, I think is definitely up for debate.
Yeah, I mean the warning is appreciated, I would say. Yeah. At least they tried to say like, don't call us again, don't contact us. And what that's a pretty like terrifying moment too. Like a lot of suspense and tension is built up in that moment. And then, she's just like has this moment, you see the look on her face and you're like, she's absolutely going to continue this.
And that's the journey we've been seeing her on, right? Like she's
believe
like
in humanity. Yeah.
She's like,
she doesn't believe in the goodness of humanity.
It's going to be better. She's like, whatever this is going to be better than what we have now. Cause I've seen nothing to make me feel like humanity it deserves to be the top sort of on the food chain. Right. And deserves to go on as we have gone on. She has given up all faith in that.
So the next episode is called Destroyer of Worlds. In the present, while everyone is gathered at Jack's house, Augie discovers his gaming headset and tries it on, only to be promptly ejected. Distraught, she extracts a promise from Jin and Jack to stop playing, but they press on. When Augie powers up her nanofiber project, the countdown returns to where it left off, and she again hastily shuts it down. Within the game, Jin and Jack collaborate and move quickly through levels 2 and 3, and it is revealed the headset is actually a recruitment tool used by Mike Evans, now a wealthy oil tycoon. He is also shown conversing with someone on the other side of a speaker about humankind. Level 4 takes place in the real world. Rooney and Chang meet the mysterious woman. They are shown the alien civilization's evolution in a star system containing a 3-body problem, 4 light years away, and their subsequent departure for Earth. Jack rejects this narrative, asks to leave, and is allowed to, but is later murdered at his house by Tatiana. Neither Clarence, who's staking out Jack's house, nor any of the 18 interior security cameras record Tatiana's presence.
Yeah, really interesting episode. R.I.P. Jack Rooney. Sad to see him go. Went out in a pretty epic fashion, I guess, and sort of rejecting the whole premise here and saying I don't want to be a part of this, and thinking he can walk away, but he can't.
Didn't expect John Bradley to be the one who died. They really gave him a big death scene for sure. It was pretty graphic.
Yeah. It was interesting because I was like, does she have superpowers? Because it seems like she was super strong, but then later she seems more human.
So this is where the show, I think, is attempting to have it both ways. It wants to play in the same space as the book, being hard sci-fi. And then it keeps introducing elements that, we don't have all the information yet, and so maybe I can be wrong about this. But she seems to be fantastical. Like, she seems to be breaking the rules of like in hard sci-fi, it would be considered things that seem rationally possible. She's like disappearing and reappearing in areas. The camera stuff is one thing, but she literally is like a ghost. Like, she's literally like appearing and reappearing. Yeah. Maybe there's some sort of extra dimensional thing going on here.
Yeah, I was to say maybe they're able to project in some way, and she's more than just, maybe there is like a physical version of her, but maybe these aliens are able to project, like do a physical projection of some kind. I mean, the thing is, like, the famous quote is that like any sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic. And that's kind of what we're seeing here, and maybe there is, explanations for this. We just haven't got them yet. But I agree. At times she seems supernatural. But it's creepy to think that maybe there is some sort of explanation for this, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
It is cool and it's fun for sure, but in a story that like I assumed was going to be very much science forward, it kept striking me as like this seems like fantasy, but it's not that I didn't enjoy it. It's just that I was thinking about the fact that like the book didn't seem to go to this extent. Like it didn't.
Sure, we don't see this person going around killing people
magically. Almost.
We haven't seen that yet, at least.
Right. We'll see.
But that's okay, even if, as long as they find a way to explain it that passes muster, then I'm okay with that. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. I'm withholding judgment. I really like this stuff with, the High Sparrow himself, Jonathan Pryce, as Mike Evans in the modern day, and conversing with my lord over this like little radio. And they basically formed a little cult out there on this ship. And they are conversing directly with the aliens, who I guess they collectively call my lord, or our lord, or I don't know. It was chilling when the aliens on the other side don't seem to understand the concept of lying, and then Mike Evans like conveys it to them like, sometimes we say things, but it isn't actually true. And then the idea of like, so this is a lie about a liar, like this story, right? That doesn't exist about in real life. And they're like, we have to consider this. And they go silent for a while. And then it sounds like maybe he just kind of condemned humanity a little bit, because they don't seem as like, they're like, we can't trust you. Anybody who lies can't be trusted. So we're not going to trust humanity. So the implication I got, not good.
Like they needed to be eradicated rather than like we can coexist. So yeah. Definitely.
And he's also like teaching them about the idea of pests who could be stomped under the boot. And I'm like, dude, you're not doing a good job right now. Part of humanity. And this is actually a big ethical question, honestly, in first contact stuff, is like, who gets to speak for humanity? Who is talking to them? Because it carries so much weight, and like what is said could matter so much. It's a pretty wild concept to think about this guy who's just having these conversations. Like he's speaking for humanity in such a huge momentous, event and moment in the meeting of these two,
just like Ye Wenjie did though too, right? Like Ye Wenjie made the decision
Ye Wenjie as well
to, put us up on the proverbial intergalactic platter.
Like, can you imagine if like, like there's a call coming in from outer space, and there's aliens on the other line. They want to speak to somebody from Earth. Who gets to answer? Who gets to talk to them? It's such a huge question.
Yeah.
It's and I don't know the answer to it, but it's definitely a wild one to think about.
Yeah. I'm not feeling great about our chances across the board. I don't know. People who have our best interests.
Put Hank Green on the line.
That's not a bad idea. That's not a terrible idea.
I don't know why it came to mind, but
I mean, he's got the scientific, I would say he's got like a level of scientific know-how, and he seems to be like a genuinely good person that has the good of humanity in mind. So
I'm sure everyone would agree, and there would be no conflict.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We also get, this is the moment where we get the zero G scene where like everything's flying. It's probably the biggest CGI sequence we've had so far. Again, the horses did not look great. I don't know what it was about the horses in particular, but they really didn't look good. Animals sometimes, people, like the CGI really struggles with. But even just kind of like this world itself, not the best looking, but kind of a cool moment regardless, if I can kind of set that aside. And honestly, this CGI looked like it is maybe a little outdated. Like it would have probably looked really good like 10 years ago. It just didn't look as modern to me as I would have expected.
It's really interesting. I keep noticing in shows where it's like, I think good enough is get like, there's a certain level of like, it's good enough. Let's get it out and
sure.
Not spend all the budget here. And like, we've come to expect like everything to look perfect.
Yeah.
And there, I don't know. I'm on the fence about it because I'm like, of course I want people to have all the time and all the money in the world to craft like the perfect version of what they want to make.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like, I get that like things have to like practically get made and like people, it has to come out and you have to do the best you can with what you're given. And sometimes it looks like this and it looks fine. It looks serviceable. Like you said, 10 years ago, I wouldn't even think about it.
So a couple questions about the game. First off, how did they initiate 2-player mode?
Yeah.
It's unclear to me. They just like wanted it to be and then
I think they
I
willed
guess.
it. It's all about like neural. It's just like you think it and it happens.
I mean, this would be the ultimate in gaming if you could do this.
Oh yeah. I mean, you're effectively, there's another world. It's completely its own. It's neurologically another world.
Wild stuff to consider. But and then there's this figure who keeps showing up in the game. She's like a flying badass with a sword. She's also the one who like kills you if you show up and you're on the wrong headset on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who is this? Is this an alien?
I think so.
Or is this another human?
I think it's an alien. But yeah, that's actually a good question. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Unclear. Definitely shows up like a badass every time.
Yeah.
The way she comes floating down was really cool.
The little girl too is like really trying to appeal to like save us.
Maybe also an alien.
Save the aliens.
Or maybe just a program. I don't know.
Something like that. But the idea is to I think drum up sympathy for these aliens, for some of these people to be like, they're beings that we need to save.
Playing off people's empathy. And again, like it's unclear whether or not that's a good thing.
Right.
And I think that's good, right? Like I think it would be a very different story if we knew for a fact the aliens had bad intentions, are going to wipe out humanity, are 100% bad news, right?
Yeah.
They may be that, but like there's an element of like we don't really know. And that I think that's right, especially when you're dealing with a truly alien society, like who knows?
Yeah.
And so because of that, like having some empathy for them, I think is reasonable, right? And it leaves it a little bit gray.
I also like this idea in a story of like appealing to people's sense of empathy and having like intergalactic refugees almost like you can't just leave them on this planet. Also, like there's a certain obligation of just like life in the universe to help if you can, but it's like at what cost? Are they going to just take our resources? Are they going to take us over? Can we coexist? There's so many interesting ethical questions that come up.
Yeah, it's and it's funny because we I think it's in the next episode we get it's said that it's going to be 400 years.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious to know if that holds. Does that timeline hold? And if so, is this whole series going to be about this like coming civilization, but isn't here yet, but is kind of in some ways, because obviously it's able to communicate in advance, and like so it is communicating in advance, and so its presence is felt even if they're not physically here yet.
Well, and if Tatiana is some sort of alien construct, whatever she is, clearly they've sent preemptive. Somehow they're able to affect the world.
It couldn't be physically, right? Like it couldn't,
I don't think so.
Like,
yeah.
Right, then they would be here, right? I assume they're going at max speed,
Yeah. But that was really interesting when they said the 400 years thing. I had the same thought of like, okay, well that kind of changes the context of what I think this entire series is going to be, because I thought we were getting boots on the ground aliens here. We'll see. So episode 4 is called Our Lord. In 1985, somewhere in the North Atlantic, Evans introduces Ye Wenjie, now a professor at a Chinese university, to his ship Judgment Day, which contains advanced satellite technology used to communicate with the aliens, who are called Santi, Trisolarans. Back in 2024, following Jack's murder, Thomas Wade, Clarence's superior, and Clarence enlist Jin Chang's help in infiltrating Evans' secret organization to collect intelligence. Under Wade and Clarence's guidance, Jin attends a secret countryside meeting where Ye Wenjie reveals herself to be its leader, and that the purpose of the Earth Trisolarist movement is to help the Santi arrive and take over the Earth. Soon after, British security forces raid the meeting. After realizing Jin is a spy, Tatiana attempts to assassinate her but gets shot, sparking a shootout. Tatiana escapes, but Ye Wenjie and most of the cultists are captured. Meanwhile, Evans tells the story of Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf to his Santi liaison. However, the Santi struggle to understand the concept of fiction. The liaison chillingly interprets the story as a testament to human deception and claims they cannot coexist with humanity.
Okay, so this was episode 4. Santi. I think I said Yanti earlier or something, which is a thing from D&D. So that I'm probably saying the wrong thing there, but interesting. Yeah. So I mean, we already discussed that conversation, so we don't have to like spend too much time on it. But yeah, so fascinating. I do want to highlight one of my favorite moments. It's a very small moment, but I loved it, and it was Clarence at home with his son. We get this little moment of his home life. And I thought there was some just incredibly fun dialogue between these two. I love that she's like, oh, you gotta get a job, and he's like, I'm an entrepreneur, and he's like, entrepreneur isn't a job, it's a word you learned how to pronounce. Which was hilarious. There's just some really excellent lines in there as they kind of go back and forth, and clearly they have this like back and forth repartee, and I don't know, it humanized Clarence in a way, and it's like I've been wanting to like this character, but this is what I needed, I think, to be like fully bought in on this guy and how much I like him. And he talks about how to him, like his perception of his job is that he's protecting people, and that's really telling too, right? Like ultimately that's what he feels like he's doing. Mm-hmm. And then of course the son is able to bring in the like, but you're basically a cop and you're a functionary for a dysfunctional government and all this stuff, right? It's really interesting, and I think that is going to be a plot line going forward with this character, with Clarence, is like, is he protecting people, and is he always going to feel the same way about it as he does now, as things get even crazier?
Well, whether or not he does, that is his intention going in.
Yeah.
So it's good. It's a good like moral compass.
Makes me want to root for him, man.
Yeah.
I already like this character, but this is like what really sold me on it. So I love that scene. I'm so fascinated by the stuff with Dr. Chung going to this summit. We had something similar in the book happen, but this is just way more dramatic, right? It's this big group, and then it gets raided. We see a shootout take place.
She's also like wearing a wire, basically. Like she's kind of a spy, so that's dangerous, more dangerous for the character.
Yeah, and then we get the reveal that Ye Wenjie is actually the founder of this organization, which we haven't gotten that in the book yet. I don't know if it's going to be true, but I love it, and I was so happy to see her sort of at the heart of everything. And yeah, I don't know, this whole it reminds me of a lot of cults, because like I listen to all kinds of like true crime podcasts and stuff, and like podcasts about just weird things, and sometimes they discuss these different cults and different groups that do worship alien entities. So it feels very familiar, but what's even wilder is the idea that like this one, it's real. Like this one, they actually have a radio in which they're talking to legit alien, and what that would do. And like, yeah, there would be a religious fervor around this that totally makes sense. And it's really fascinating. It also just shows the way people can be manipulated, and how desperate people are to want to believe. And then the question becomes for me, is Ye Wenjie going into this as a religious believer, or is she, I want to think she's like fully aware of what's going on, and like if she's religious and like she just believes that like humanity needs to be changed. It's more of a practical way. Like a practical way, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. An actual entity that can affect things rather than like an abstract idea. It's not like she actually thinks they're going to come and save humanity, but she's like, but what does that, I mean, that's what she thinks, but like, what's that going to look like? Yeah. Like, she's definitely gearing up to be our antagonist, it seems. Like that organization as a whole seems very culty, like you said. It seems they seem like bringing about the end of humanity. Again, it's hard to blame them. I can see their motivation. Yeah. If they're like, cool, because like they're coming. It's like, so like we better like talk to them now and start laying the groundwork. Another big thing too, with it being 400 years possibly, they're like creating this organization and this cult to try to carry on this religion, basically to pave the way for them
the grandchildren and everyone far down the line. It's not like they are going to see the fruits of the labor.
Right. Yeah. Again, that's another wild thing. I don't know, like, what are the limitations that they're working with, and how are they able to do so much from such a far distance? I assume some of this won't be explained, and it's just kind of leaning on that idea of like, there's a way, we just don't understand it because it's a technology we don't have. So I can grant that, and that's probably the answer to a lot of this stuff. Unfortunately, that's probably all we're gonna get. I love the line about Santa Claus, by the way. She's like, do you think that these are aliens? And he says, you don't have to believe in Christmas to know that people give gifts on Christmas, or something like that. And then she says, but do you believe in Santa Claus? And then he just kind of gives this like mysterious look. And then Clarence chimes in and says, ho, ho, ho. Which I thought that was funny.
It was funny, but also like so corny, like at the same time. It was very much like
I liked it, man.
I think it's funny, but I think like that's a super tongue-in-cheek joke that can like teeters the line, I think, for some people. You know what I mean?
That's probably fair. I liked it because I think it's kind of like we kind of do. Like, to me, it's like, these aliens are real. And like, I think she's still coming to grips with it. Because in this moment, she's like, do we really think this is aliens? Yeah. And it's like, yeah, it is.
Well, I think the
we got to get on board with that at a certain point here.
And I think the greater like messaging of the scene is awesome. I just mean like the actual dialogue itself, I think might be jarring to people. It's like funny. You're bordering into like, you know, Die Hard at that point. Like you're like, oh, you know what I mean? Like,
no, I
have a machine gun. Like,
yeah. All right, that's fair. Yeah, man, I actually, this fourth episode might have been my favorite of the four. And in general, I feel like the show has been building momentum in a positive way. I'm liking where it's heading.
I agree that it's building momentum. It did feel like the first one was the big hook for me, though. Like that first scene and the first episode, the intrigue, the build up. I thought that it was like particular effort was spent to make it a compelling and like I said, like gripping first episode that keeps you coming back for the rest of the series. I felt like 2 was pretty good, and then there was like maybe a little drop off in 3, and then 4 I think was back to good. I'm hoping that we maintain good pacing and that like the mystery doesn't get bogged down, because we're 2/3 of the way through the book and we're currently halfway through the show, and it feels like they've already overtaken the book material for half the show.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it feels like we're further along in the show. We have a lot more answers at the very least.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how they spend their time in these last 4 episodes, and if it's executed well. But overall, I have been enjoying it. You know, I've been interested the whole way, and I think this has been an interesting one to see get adapted, and the changes that they've made, and some of the ways that they've pulled these characters apart and kind of had them do their own things and interact. Yeah, it's turned into more of like you predicted, sort of a human-driven character story with a lot of these larger elements going on. Which I think
just like personal taste, like I like that, I think, a little more. I like that element of having a lot of characters and, you know, that feel fully realized and interesting, and having interesting, you know, interpersonal relationships at the heart of it, right? Like the idea that we have this like Alex Sharp's character, Will Downing, and how he has this crush on Dr. Chung, right? And like he's been given this diagnosis, and this is a very like real story going on at the heart of this, you know, alien, you know, show.
And you're like, invested in it.
I love that mix, right? Like, and the way that those things can interact with each other is really fascinating. And how all of a sudden now it feels like all of humanity has been given this diagnosis, right? So if you're kind of extrapolating it out as again as a metaphor, like it feels like humanity has an expiration date now, because at a certain point they're going to get here, and it seems like it's not going to be good for everybody.
Well, and to further extrapolate the metaphor, when he gets the diagnosis, he has the surgery, he's like coming out of it, he's still under medication. He said something about like the cancer and I had a conversation, and we've decided to coexist. I've given them a little pocket in my pancreas, and I get everything else. And like we could think, you know, extrapolate that out as the aliens getting a pocket of Earth and negotiating and that kind of thing possible in the future. I don't know how this story is going to end.
Yeah, more likely, I feel like humanity gets a pocket.
Probably.
They get the rest. Probably. I mean, because if they come in with the superior technology, like, why would they agree to that?
Agreed.
That's always been the worry about this, right? About people who are like, pump the brakes on this. You know, we shouldn't be trying to contact alien civilizations. That's some of the fear around it. I don't know how I feel. I feel like I feel different ways on different days. Because I can see that worry, but also that feels like a very human worry to me too. And to assume that other alien civilizations or that other civilizations are going to behave in such human ways, I don't know if that's the right way to go about it. Maybe everybody's out there in a big federation and they're waiting for us. They're waiting to welcome us with open arms to the federation, right?
Once we solve world peace, they'll approach us and allow us to enter into this peaceful society. Yeah.
There's been a lot of interesting things kind of put out there in sci-fi, different things, and like ultimately, it's like fear of the unknown is reasonable, but I don't think we should let it paralyze us in our attempts to, broaden our horizons and reach for the stars and explore and see what's going on out there in our universe. That's just how I feel about it, but let us know in the comments if you disagree. Speaking of, if you enjoyed this episode and our coverage of Three Body Problem, let us know in the form of a rating and review. We will be back next week where we're going to be covering the next 4 episodes and the last part of the book, comparing and contrasting them all, coming up with a rating on whether or not we think ultimately the book or the show was the better version. So make sure to stick around next week for that.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film. We're also on TikTok, Blue Sky. We're basically on every single social media platform.
And if you'd like to support this podcast in another way, we do have a Patreon. We mentioned it earlier, patreon.com/inktofilm. You can get all kinds of bonus content on there, including our episode where we really lay into season 8 of Game of Thrones. So check out that on Patreon.
And you can support for as little as $2. We do appreciate that. Thank you also to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's it. Nothing left to do, but I guess go out and stare at the sun, dehydrate for another week, and wait to return.
All right, I'm going back out, even though the eclipse is well over. So until next time,
keep adapting.